Good morning and welcome to our latest edition of Kaleidoscope. My name is Anton Jurgis and I'm the CEO and founder of Collider. For those of you who don't know us, we fuse live, virtual, digital and social to accelerate brand growth. Brand growth, it's an interesting concept in its own right, particularly at this time, and it's this that we are looking to explore further today in the context of COVID, lockdown, and what it means for brands looking to emerge from lockdown and engage consumers with either newly defined brand purpose, new products or services to launch, or quite simply, remind consumers that you're still here. I think it's fair to say that COVID has truly scuppered many plans around launch, with numerous logistical and practical restrictions being put in place. Obviously, the cancellation of large gatherings have blocked brands' abilities to undertake more traditional face-to-face activities, experiential and sampling. For many of our clients, we have successfully pivoted around these challenges by offering digital and social solutions via virtual events, digital exhibitions, and social sampling. In some cases, this has actually been a positive for clients, as we have been able to show a much more connected journey and deliver real valuable data proving return on investment. But what we're seeing is that there's been real change, and launch considerations post-COVID go much deeper than that. Behaviours and habits seem to have changed. In the early days, we all witnessed a more community-spirited thinking pervading across consumers. Brands were quick to jump onto this. Since then, we have also seen a huge backlash against the establishment. Public disorder, protests and unrest have been rife across the globe, albeit for very good causes. But how much of this is here to stay? And once again, what does it mean for brands? With me today, I have an expert panel that can help unlock some of these very complex questions. We have Ben Pask, Managing Director and founder of Rare. Rare have been collecting data every week since the 16th of March, charting the changes in behaviour, in consumer attitudes and purchase journeys by sector and by demographic. We also have Stephen Donogratsky, Head of Behavioural Science for Kellogg's. Stephen will be looking at that data and applying a scientific lens to it so we can start to understand what habits and behaviours will stick. Finally, we'll be handing over to Tracy Sorgiovanni and Natasha Blevins, both from Collider, who will help you unlock what that means to brands and what we can do to overcome the challenges that these changes will provide. One last thing before I do hand over, do please stay with us until the end as we have an exciting offer for you. Without further ado, let me hand over to Ben.
Thank you, Anton. Hi everybody, my name's Ben Pask and I'm from Rare Consulting. We're a research and digital product development company. Since the middle of March, we've been measuring how consumers have responded to the pandemic. We've been measuring how they've felt, how we're seeing change in their behaviour, and also what are their hopes and dreams for the future. As a research company, this is one of those periods where it's obviously terrifying, but also really interesting, because you really get a sense not only in terms of how consumers are responding, but also in terms of how businesses are thinking about things. And the sort of requests that we get in from different companies across a whole range of categories is really trying to understand not just the here and now, but what the future might look like as well, which is a difficult question to answer, and Stephen has plenty of thoughts on that. But there's lots of different ways to think about it based upon the data that we're seeing. Obviously, as we head into the unknown, we all need to be able to be agile and adaptable to some of these changes. And it's really been quite fascinating to see how things have changed. So in terms of how people have felt, we're seeing real differences since the start of when we started measuring in the middle of March all the way through to now. The pervading emotion throughout the whole period has been one of worry. And that's moved from 57% at its peak in the middle of April, which is currently around between 38 and 40 at the moment. We do see movements throughout each week. But as the lockdown measures change and people are interacting a bit more, it hasn't necessarily stopped the levels of worry that we see. And this is really important for brands and companies and people who work in marketing departments or product innovation departments as well, because this is really fundamental stuff to understand how people might behave in the future. With that though, we do see that the emotions are split. So although we are seeing around 2 in 5 people feel a sense of worry, we see a good proportion of people who feel content. So they've felt actually quite happy about the situation. They've actually enjoyed their space and time to spend with their family. But then you also have a group of people who feel quite restless and they, not particularly trusting of the government guidelines, want to be able to get out there and do their own thing. And that, of course, those three main emotions elicit very different responses to how we've seen things develop over the past few months. In terms of our concerns around COVID-19, it's remained high all the way through. So at the peak, we've seen it around 90%, and it's currently at 88% of people feel some degree of concern towards COVID-19. And again, that has a big impact in terms of people's willingness to engage with different categories and brands. So understanding all this stuff is going to be fundamentally important when we start to try to understand what the future might look like and how they might behave. In terms of people's hopes, as I mentioned at the top of my piece, that we've been looking at what people are looking forward to in the future. What are they pining for? What are they looking forward to? At the peak of the lockdown, when we were restricted to our homes and able to go places, you saw that people felt a real sense of community with their family. They felt a real sense of community with their friends as well, whether they be connecting over Zoom or different video conferencing softwares. And what it showed was that people were really looking forward to be able to spend time with those cohorts of people, their friends, their family. They were looking forward to experiencing things, to tasting things, to seeing things. And over time, particularly in the last 12 weeks, we've seen that actually people have been looking forward to more of that experiential side of life necessarily than being able to spend money and be able to get back onto the high street. And this is really important stuff for all sorts of different brands. I think what's quite nice about it is that it does show that as humans, we are social beings. We do want to spend time with other people. It's where we feel at our most happy. It's what we look forward to. And of course, it does cause people to get a sense of perspective on things in particular. In more recent weeks, what we have seen is that desires to go on holiday have increased from 4% at the end of April, where we are in the middle of July. It's currently at 12% of people are looking forward to holiday, and we're starting to see people claim they are booking, saving money for holidays and trips and so on. And that will have a big impact on local economies in particular, given that lots of people in the UK plan to take their holiday on the British Isles. I think what's also quite interesting as well, commercially speaking, is actually when you look at the data, what people are looking forward to, we're still not quite seeing as much evidence of people looking forward to going shopping and spending money on the high street. And it does cause difficulties for some brands, but there's opportunity for companies who've really got their act together online. In terms of changes in behaviour, again, it's been quite interesting to see how people have adapted. So I think some kind of really, really nice things that we've seen over the time is that people have learnt new skills. So at the peak of lockdown, you had 20% of people learning a new creative skill. You had around 1 in 3 people doing DIY. We're potentially going to come out of this with people who've enthusiastic about new things they've never tried before. And that's wonderful. That's really great. When you look at how people intend to spend money in the future compared to how they were before, you do see some changes in terms of their channel preference. So we did a bit of analysis looking at people who typically prefer to buy in store and what they're likely to do in the future. Are they going to continue buying in store, or are they actually going to consider going to different channels? And what you see is a real diversity in terms of what people expect they'll do. And in some categories, we see a movement from people who'd previously buy in-store to online as high as 20% in some categories, such as DIY and exercise. So depending on the type of retailer you are, it's not necessarily the case that everyone's going to follow suit with buying essential goods, as we've seen with Ocado. There will be some variation according to the category, but it's really going to be important to understand some of this stuff. And in terms of that movement to online, I think what makes things perhaps even more challenging for brands is that a really big proportion, and in some cases as many as 48% of people who are going to move from in-store to online are those aged over 55 plus. So for lots of brands who've not necessarily considered them to be a key cohort, are really going to have to start to empathize and understand what's important to these people, what makes them tick, because there's clearly an immense opportunity with that particular cohort. And finally, in terms of brands, it's been interesting to see how they've performed with it through the pandemic. And we've been measuring not just how people think they've responded to the pandemic, whether they've given a good or bad response to the situation, but also their levels of likability and trust. And what we see is that over time, for all the brands we've measured, actually levels of trust have moved from 71% to around 60%. That's currently what we're tracking at this point towards the end of July. And that presents all sorts of problems for companies. We know from our own research that trust is such a fundamental part of loyalty towards any type of entity, be it brand, person, your dog, your friend, your local coffee shop, ensuring you get a consistent level of service. And it presents issues for companies that maybe have problems in that regard. And when you look at those companies that have performed not as well as others, you generally see very much a kind of corporate social responsibility angle to that. And what I mean is that those that have been perceived to not necessarily have our nation's back and to behave in a considerate way have certainly struggled in terms of their trust scores. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves over time. We're of course measuring these things every week, and if there's plenty of data out there from lots of different sources as well, tracking all these different metrics. And I think it's very important for anybody to get a real sense of the broad picture of things. So that's it for me. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. There's obviously plenty of detail in those numbers, but thanks very much for listening, and speak to you soon.
Thank you, Ben. Next up is Stephen. As well as leading the behavioural science function at Kellogg's, Stephen has recently founded consultancy Naitava, using behaviour and data to manage moments of change. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Anton. My name's Stephen Donogrodsky. I'm Behavioural Science Director at Kellogg and also co-founder of a new behavioural and data consultancy called Naitava. Naitava takes the data that you have and helps explain the behaviour of your customers and consumers, using it to actually help you as a business. Today, I'm going to start easy ways of understanding what has happened and how we should start thinking about what we should do next. So the easiest way, I think, for us to understand human behaviour in terms of models is to use the work of Kurt Lewin, who is the father of social psychology, his idea of the person in their environment, dynamic field theory. Now, in some ways that might sound really complicated. It's actually not. All it means is that your entire actions are dictated by two things. One of which is your sort of goals, your beliefs, your attitudes, your motivations. And the other thing is the environment in which you find yourself at that particular time. So even if you're the biggest lover of Coca-Cola in the world, if you find yourself on a first date with somebody you really like in a restaurant that doesn't sell Coke, you're not going to leave. That's what we mean by the environment. And the environment or context really can dictate responses. Work has been done suggesting that outside of lockdown, the context can dictate up to 70% of your responses. So when we start thinking about it in lockdown, it becomes even more important. And actually thinking about that context or environment is instrumental to thinking about what people have done during lockdown. This is really important because when we're sitting there thinking about habits, and people are talking a lot about the habits that have been created under lockdown. Now, normally you think about a habit being something that's actually dictated by the environment. So, could we create new habits under lockdown? Yes, we could. Habits are either formed, or the definition of habits and how long it takes to create a habit, are either formed by time, in which case the smallest amount of time people suggest is about 66 days, or by the number of times something is repeated within that environmental context. But the important thing about it is you have to be cued by the environmental context. And in this case, it's lockdown. So post-lockdown, when people are getting into work again, the environmental context will change. So actually the things that you've been doing under lockdown aren't going to be cued in the same way anymore. I mean, we know that lockdown isn't going to change completely overnight and that people aren't going to completely go back to work. But in the same kind of way, if what we're assuming is that actually we're going to continue with new behaviours because those new behaviours have become habitual, but we don't actually have the cues to do them, it means that we won't actually do them for that reason. Now, there are some reasons we might do them. If they're easier, more attractive, more social and timely. This is a framework created by the Behavioural Insight team for interventions and for creating interventions. And we know that if those behaviours are better in those ways, they might well replace those that went before them. But does this mean that post-lockdown we'll just revert to doing what we did before? Well, not really. I think that this is crucial, is to understand actually that behaviour is never static. And there seems to be a misconception at the moment that you're either going to be doing what we did before or we're going to be doing what we did during, but not that actually, not only will it become a hybrid of those two, but we'll develop new behaviours post. And we're already seeing that in markets such as China, South Korea, and indeed the UK. It's really interesting when you look at what's socially acceptable now when we're walking on the streets of London. How far do you actually genuinely think you need to be away from people? And it's going to be interesting to think about it this way, and interesting to think about this constant state of flux and transition, and which behaviours are providing an advantage, which ones are seen as the best, and which ones will continue to do. So, what next? Well, at the best of times, people are not very good at making decisions under uncertainty, conditions of uncertainty. There's a huge amount of work now that has been done on understanding how people make those decisions. The idea of biases, heuristics. At least one Nobel Prize has been won by people explaining how that works. We've got a huge amount of uncertainty going on at the moment, and people really, really hate that. It's not just me, but it's everybody. And the reason we hate it is because it makes doing what we do really difficult. During lockdown, or going into lockdown, there was one global message. That message was universal. Everybody was repeating it. For the first time, we actually had everybody being told one thing, which was to stay at home. And actually, we saw people respond to that really well. We saw people think of themselves as part of society and begin to pull themselves into one thing. But now we've got many different messages. Even the government are putting up messages which could be seen as contradictory. So what are we supposed to do? Because we've actually created a huge amount of uncertainty, and actually the political system, the way it's working now, is it's putting the emphasis on the individual. So I now have to make the decision about what I think is safe. And we see responses to this on the spectrum. And you know, there are a small number of people, and they tend to be younger, more male, who want to go out and celebrate and party. And that's absolutely fantastic in lots of ways. We have another group who tend to be older, who are still sitting there and hiding at home. Most people are stuck somewhere in between, particularly if you have the financial imperative that means you actually need to go to work. And this means it's going to be really difficult to understand. Are you just going to go to work if you have to, or are you going to go shopping as well? How are you going to start responding and interacting with all the different things that you need going forwards? How are you going to buy products? New behaviours are going to be very short term, but are systematic of the impact of lockdown. They're actually going to be dictated by it to a large extent. Having said that, we're only at the beginning of the period of COVID. Many estimates suggest that we have another up to 24 months of people responding to it. The recession is actually going to be a COVID recession. We're actually going to see behaviours change. We're possibly going to see multiple short lockdowns. And this is going to create a lot of short-term behaviours. So we need to be very responsive in the way we actually think about what's actually happening. So what are going to be the human needs post-lockdown? Because this is really important. And by adopting some of these needs, we're going to be in a position to help people and to fulfill the needs they have and the desires that they have as well. So, very quickly, some of those are around change. People want change. People want social change. People want to change what they're doing. People want to feel different about life. There are going to be some trends that people are going to adopt and continue with, such as health. We've seen a real focus on health. And that's not just physical health, although that is a really important part of it. It's also about building mental fitness, mental fitness is a really interesting concept for people at the moment, and something that if you are helping people do this, it will go a long way to actually driving their behaviour. One of our essential needs as people is human contact. We are actually animals at heart. We are developed as animals, and as animals we are pack animals by instinct. We need that form of human contact. We need to be able to touch each other. We need to be able to even just speak to other people in very different ways. How we actually help people think about that, work with that, is going to be really important going forwards. But it's not just, because this can sound slightly depressing, but it's not just those kind of elements around how we help them create change, how we think about their mental fitness, how we think about getting them to connect to each other. It's the way in which we do it as well. Inspiration and fun is a crucial element that people are lacking at this point in time. People want some form of safe fun that they can actually think of. Now, I know an awful lot has been shared around TikTok, and the number of people who've done it as a way of releasing energy, as a coping strategy almost, is kind of very large actually in terms of the actual numbers. But one of the things that we looked at a long time ago and we've thought about quite a lot is this idea of fun, and fun theory in terms of helping people shift their behaviours. Now, it might not help people shift their behaviours into a habitual pattern, but if you're looking to help people change in a one-off fashion, then it's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And any form of experience that is designed for people should take fun into account and people's need for it. Because actually, it's a great way of helping them. Because otherwise, we're going to actually get into a position where the majority of people's behaviour at the moment has been dictated by anxiety and boredom because they've been stuck at home. Now, anxiety and boredom, as I'll come on and talk about, is a pressure cooker. If we want to help people alleviate this, if we want to take advantage and help them deliver the outcomes they want, and be part of that and be brands who are seen and work with them along those lines, then it's going to be crucial that we actually do inspire them, create leadership and trust, but do it in a fun, light-hearted fashion. So why do we need trust and leadership? Well, two real reasons. The trust in the political system has been really tested at this point in time. It's been down to politicians to push people through, and many brands have been in the position of being able to support early ideas of lockdown. Now that system is at least being tested, possibly even finding criticism from many different sources. It's no longer the place we need to be, but what we do need and what everybody wants is something they can trust. Ideally, something that provides them with a way of creating change, a way of building their mental and physical health and fitness, a way of creating some form of human contact in a fun, light-hearted way. But they're only really going to do this if they can trust you and trust the brands that they're working with. This is about walking the talk and actually being there to support and help them in a way that they need. But don't expect an easy ride. I've talked about the idea of anxiety and boredom being a pressure cooker. They really are. We've seen an awful lot of people responding to what they see as unfairness in many different fashions. Personally, if I was looking at a brand campaign going out soon, I'd plan in my crisis comms pretty much from the start. And I'd plan it in particularly because what we're seeing at the moment in the way people are reacting is not the normal way people react. Far greater scrutiny is being placed on brands at this point in time. People feel slightly cynical. They feel slightly cheated by what's happened. They feel like they're being put into a place where they find it difficult financially and also from a health point of view. Now, what better way to help people than put something really positive out there? But unless you're walking the talk, then it's going to be very difficult for you. So create things, experiences for people that are amazing in terms of what they do, but also are honest in terms of how they react, if you don't want people to react badly to them. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Next up is Tracy. Tracy is our operations director here at Collider, and she brings with her over 20 years experience delivering integrated experiential activations and launch programs across multiple sectors. She's going to give us some thoughts on how brands need to behave in light of these COVID-driven human truths.
Thanks, Anton. You may be thinking that all this data and behavioural science stuff is very well and good, but what does it mean for me as a marketer? And what does it mean for my brand? And how does it potentially affect my plans to launch new products at this uncertain time? Considering the data that Ben has presented and the points that Stephen has made, I'm going to give you a few thoughts on how you should be approaching your brand and product launch planning. My first point is around understanding your consumer. As Stephen suggested, there will be different behavioural directions that your consumer will travel in, and this won't necessarily be dictated by your usual demographic segmentation models. Some consumers will be pulling inwards and focusing on safety and preservation of what they have, limiting anything that may represent a risk to them or their loved ones. Others will be focusing on a desire to grow, to make up for lost time and enjoy life again, to seek human contact, to re-engage and to find joy. When approaching your brand and launch plans, you'll need to demonstrate a higher understanding of your consumer. Which behavioural traits will they have? What direction will they travelling in? And what mindset do they have? It's important that all your communication is human first. Your consumers are human after all. So having an insight into their particular mindset will be crucial. The next point I want to make is around ideologically framed narratives. I think the temptation is to centre campaigns and messaging around the traditional product and service benefits of your brand or product. This is especially the case if you're using traditional paid media channels or when your launch plans are very channel driven rather than taking a channel neutral approach. Consumers have spent the last few months living in a new civic-minded social order where they support their communities and they come together and support each other. And Stephen mentioned the fact that confidences in the system have been shaken. Brands therefore have a real opportunity to present a narrative and tell a story that aligns with their consumers' ideologies. Show empathy and a shared understanding that creates a connection. And it's this connection that drives the trial and then the purchase and then ultimately brand loyalty. My next point is around being purpose-led, delivering on brand values. This crisis means that more than ever, it's important you don't just say what you stand for as a brand, but that you take real action. Walking the talk develops genuine, truthful connections with consumers, and this provides the basis for a beautiful consumer brand friendship. In fact, 63% of modern consumers prefer to do business with brands that share their personal values and beliefs. At this time, a focus on social responsibility of brands and products will be higher than ever. And with their trust in the political system having been tested, our consumers are cynical. Brands need to ensure that their purpose-led campaigns don't look like a cheap marketing ploy or exploit the current situation for commercial gain. Be clear on what your purpose and values are and bring them to life in an authentic and empathetic way. Which brings me on to my next point, which is around brand authenticity, honesty, and trust. When consumers perceive brands as being authentic, they believe them. Brand authenticity uses honesty and empathy as a way of building engagement with consumers, and it's this engagement that leads to trust and loyalty. Think in terms of human interaction rather than data or analytics, and people buy stories, they don't just buy products. And be honest. Don't act like business as usual or the crisis didn't happen or try and sugarcoat the situation. Building trust takes time. It doesn't just happen with one-off activation. It needs to be built across an accumulation of brand moments. Our creative director Tash will be talking a bit more about how you build and connect these brand moments shortly. My final point is around focusing on experiences. I think what came through really loud and clear in Stephen's section was a fundamental need for human contact. And the desire for real life, fun, sensory boosts, safe ones of course. Our craving for human connection and multi-sensory pleasures has not been unsustained, and it can really not replace the emotional fulfillment of a shared experience, whether we're in the real or virtual world. A craving for real and opportunities for fun will continue to build. We'll see an explosion of culture and fun as restrictions are lifted. And we're already seeing this, and we're seeing evidence of this now as the lockdown restrictions are being eased. Brands can look to respond to this by centering their campaigns around experiences as a means to engage and to invite conversation, within responsible safety parameters, of course. Tash is going to touch on some examples of how experiences don't just mean live events or face-to-face sampling. And that segues really nicely into me introducing our creative director, Natasha Blevins. She has over 25 years experience building, developing and running creative departments for a diverse range of agencies, both here and in Australia. So over to you, Tash.
Thanks, Tracy. I know I'm biased, but I believe creativity could be our salvation. Why? Well, due to the pandemic, we're facing scenarios that we've never encountered before, and we don't necessarily have the ready-made solutions at hand. In some instances, businesses may need a total rethink. On the one hand, that's incredibly scary, but on the other hand, very exciting, because it opens up whole new possibilities, and we're forced out of our well-trodden ditches of conventional thinking, and it means we can bring all of our creativity to the fore to solve these new challenges. And we might have some fun in the process, perhaps. But that said, having some creative guardrails is still important. I've got 3 to share. My first is having a strong red thread through all touch points is essential. Great brand and product campaigns have a broad consumer-focused idea that holds the overall campaign experience together. This is translated into a relevant and compelling narrative for every touch point. And what it gives is not only a visual signpost for every campaign asset, but it drives a consistent and seamless experience. By way of illustration, I've chosen the Sainsbury's Well Living campaign, which has run since 2017. Their red thread is the idea that having fun in the kitchen is a big part of living well. It's the idea of feeding your soul and your belly, regardless of whether you're knocking up a cordon bleu dish or cheese on toast. This idea is threaded across their comms, from recipes with rhubarb to enjoying hot cross buns, and from in-store point of sale to Spotify playlists, and from consumer to colleagues in times of celebration and in times of crisis.
To all our colleagues, thank you for stepping up, for stacking up, staying strong. Well, for everything. Sainsbury's.
For me, this is standout, ownable, inclusive, and importantly, enduring. My second recommendation is to explore new activation channels and people-powered touchpoints. Brands can innovate with how they connect with consumers in both the real and digital worlds. I have 2 sampling examples that illustrate this approach especially well. The first is for Glade, who found their move to online shopping meant fewer opportunities for trial, crucial for their product range, where testing the fragrance is key. I'm going to play you the video because it explains it far better than I could.
So how do we get people to sample our products when they're on their devices instead of in the aisles? We invented a new medium that gives online shoppers a way to sample our fragrances without ever leaving their couch. Introducing Scent by Glade, the first ever fragrance-filled packing pillow. We took those boring air pillows that protect online deliveries and turned them into vessels to smuggle our beautiful fragrances into homes. We teamed up with one of the biggest retailers in the world to make this happen. So when people received their orders and popped their pillows to recycle them, they got a free sample of our new spring fragrance, a total upgrade to an ordinary unboxing. We created awareness and sampling in the convenience of their home and let them convert it into a sale with a quick scan and tap of their phone. Boom. We're turning this wasted...
It's also worth noting that as well as the 83% sales uplift and 11 million plus impressions in the first month, it picked up a whole slew of creative awards, justifiably. I think this demonstrates great lateral thinking, going outside of conventional channels to find an intimate way to sample at home, even before COVID kept us there. My second example is at the other end of the pricing spectrum, with a digital brand experience for Gucci footwear. Using the new AR lens on Snapchat, they've enabled COVID-restricted shoppers across the globe the opportunity to virtually try on a pair of Gucci trainers before making a purchase. Users can sample 4 pairs of shoes in 2 different lenses and then purchase directly from the app using the Shop Now button. I love this. It's creative, engaging, practical, and a shareable way to shop, and importantly, puts Gucci ahead of the pack as the first retailer to utilise this new AR technology that will become ever more important to e-commerce. And lastly, I believe that it's important to create a meaningful two-way dialogue with connected brand conversations amongst the new path to purchase. It's highly likely that the current shift towards digital purchasing is going to be sustained, making it even more important to link the digital to physical in terms of truly connected brand campaigns to deliver a seamless message across all touchpoints. Lixor, part of Société Générale, found this to be key when, hit by COVID, their series of European seminars were cancelled and a future-themed ETF campaign was already in progress. This last example, by the way, is one of ours, which was completed last month. We created a digital broadcast in a magazine-style format that brought together a much broader investor base than usual, diverse expertise from future-focused speakers and from the financial world. The programme invited and enabled the digital audience to quiz the experts individually and within a panel discussion. Live translated, it enabled maximum participation Europe-wide. And downloadable content and product literature, as well as follow-up conversations, ensured a meaningful two-way dialogue. This is a great example of how an innovative new platform was born out of necessity. For the client, there's no looking back, and with intentions to run this again for other products. Well, that's it from me. Hopefully there's been a few nuggets of inspiration there for you. Remember, keep creativity at the heart of your business and you won't go too far wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Tash. Our speakers have been talking about the importance of experience to satisfy our craving for human connection. Tash's examples demonstrate how you can look outside the traditional live channels and still deliver an immersive experience. But is it still possible to create live experiences in this socially distanced world as part of your launch strategy that generate the buzz and energy of a shared event? Reduced capacity, space seating, perspex screens, social distancing graphics, and the wearing of masks don't sound conducive to fun or emotionally fulfilling events. And there will be considerations around how products are trialled too. But as society becomes more used to these safety measures in their everyday lives, including when at leisure, there's still an opportunity for brands to create connections without contact. Digital technology, we can take advantage of AR and VR to immerse consumers in brand worlds. Digital business cards, app creation, AI chatbots, podcasts, contactless payment, QR code scanning and RFID tagging all give opportunity for contact-free connections. How about, instead of one large event, also consider smaller, more intimate satellite events or roadshows? We're seeing a lot of this at the moment, where clients are asking us to focus on the detailed curation of a wow experience for a smaller, more targeted audience. Take a witness by few, experience by many approach. I use the analogy of the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Witnessed firsthand by tens of thousands, but witnessed virtually by millions, if not billions. Make sure the experiences are built with shareability and longevity in mind. Consider filming and live streaming your event to a much bigger audience. Use the event to capture branded content that can be used across digital and social channels post-event. And encourage the launch event attendees to capture content and share on their own channels. And finally, you can think about shifting brand experience to a more PR-focused stunt model as part of your launch plan. The most creative and original PR stunts manage to create buzz and invite conversation around brands through both earned media coverage and word of mouth, with minimal human presence. What I'd like to do now, just to finish up, is to share with you a practical launch framework which sets out the process and shows where some of the areas, such as audience insights and the big idea, fit within the overall campaign development. Start off by being clear what your objectives are. Be single-minded and specific. Are you looking to generate trials, steal market share, or build brand equity? Next, as Tracy mentioned, take time to develop an understanding of your audience mindset and gather insights on how to engage with them. Then it's time for the big idea. Try not to dictate the channels to use. The idea should come first before you build out how the idea executes across all touchpoints. And consider how the campaign could be further amplified to increase reach using paid, earned or owned media. And don't forget to consider what happens post-launch to give the campaign a longer tail. Have you collected consumer data that you can build into a CRM program, for example? And finally, measure and evaluate. Understanding what worked well allows you to learn and optimize for future campaigns. Before we finish, I mentioned at the beginning an incentive for you to stick around to the end. We'd like to help you kickstart the process of building your launch campaign. Give us your brief and launch objectives, and in 21 days, we'll help you define your audience mindset and key engagement insights. We'll also give you a creative idea to support the launch with a red thread that pulls through all the touch points. All free of charge in the hope that you'll stick with us to deliver the campaign for you. In the event that we are inundated with briefs, we'll focus on the briefs we receive first, so get your brief in quickly. Thank you so much for coming today. If you have any questions, please do feel free to email me. My email address should be up on the screen now. Let me know who you would like to direct the question to as well. And similarly, if you would like to give us a 21-day challenge, use the same email address. Thank you very much once again and have a great rest of the week.